"You're why this family has issues," my parents declared at dinner. Everyone nodded. I nodded as well. Then I became the reason they faced housing troubles by halting the rent payments. Sometimes being the problem is the solution. They called me a problem, a source of tension, the black sheep of the family. I promised to do better, to conform, to be the daughter they always wanted. What they didn't know was that my agreement wasn't surrender, it was strategy, and I was about to turn their entire world upside down. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as I sat at my parents' dining table, the same oak monstrosity where I'd eaten thousands of meals, celebrated countless birthdays, and endured more passive-aggressive comments than I could count. My mother, Sandra, had just set down her wineglass with slow, almost theatrical precision. "Olivia," she started, her voice cutting through the sudden silence, "we need to talk about something serious." I should have known something was off when Kyle, Chloe's husband, actually showed up. He usually found any excuse to be anywhere else. But there he was, next to Chloe, wearing that smug expression I'd grown to despise over their 6 years of marriage. "What's going on?" I asked, genuinely confused. Then my father, David, cleared his throat. He never spoke first, not in family discussions. That was always Sandra's job, the self-appointed matriarch. But tonight? He took the lead. "You're the reason this family has problems." The words hung there, thick and heavy. I looked around. Chloe nodded slowly, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her water glass. Kyle's smirk widened. Even Aunt Susan, who'd apparently been invited to this ambush without my knowledge, pursed her lips in agreement. Sandra picked up where David left off. "We've been patient, sweetheart. We've tried to be supportive. But your attitude, your choices, your constant need to be different from everyone else, it's exhausting. You create tension wherever you go. Chloe's children pick up on it. Your grandmother notices it. We all do." I just sat there, processing. Part of me wanted to argue, to defend, to scream about every way they'd marginalized me since childhood. But something else happened. I nodded. "You're right," I said quietly. "I've been the problem." The surprise on their faces was almost worth the humiliation. They'd expected a fight. Tears. Accusations. Maybe a dramatic exit. What they got was compliance. "I'll do better," I added. "I promise." The tension deflated from the room. Chloe actually smiled at me, a genuine expression I hadn't seen in years. Sandra reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Even David looked relieved. They had no idea my agreement wasn't surrender. It was strategy. But let me back up. Our family dynamic was fractured long before that dinner. When I was 11, Chloe was 14 and already being groomed for the debutante ball Sandra considered essential for social development. My mother spent weekends driving Chloe to etiquette classes, dress fittings, practice sessions. 3 years later, when it was my turn, no one asked if I wanted to participate. Sandra just announced the tradition wasn't suited to my personality. David backed her up, like he always did. My father was Sandra's echo chamber, validating her opinions with nods and occasional verbal support, never offering independent thought. His closest attempt at defending me was silence, refusing to pile on, but also refusing to intervene. In a house where Sandra's word was law, his neutrality was complicity. School offered no refuge either. Chloe attended the same private academy, 2 grades ahead, casting a shadow I couldn't escape. Teachers openly compared us. "Your sister was such a joy to have in class," they'd say, the implication screaming. I wasn't a joy. I was adequate, at best. Disappointing, at worst. Always measured against a standard I never asked to compete with. College offered a brief reprieve. Chloe chose a university 3 states away, in Washington, finally giving me room to breathe. I threw myself into academics, discovered a talent for logistics and systems management, and graduated with honors. My parents acknowledged it with a card and a modest check. When Chloe graduated, they threw a party with 70 guests and a live band. My first job out of college was administrative work at a commercial real estate firm. Boring, unglamorous, but so educational. I learned property ownership from the ground up, leases, maintenance, tenant relations, compliance. Within 2 years, I moved to a residential property management company with better advancement. Within 5, I was supervising a team of 8. Within 8, I had regional director status and a salary that would have shocked my parents if they'd ever thought to ask. They never did. Family conversations centered on Chloe's life, her wedding, her home renovations, her children's milestones. When attention occasionally turned to me, the questions were superficial, quickly abandoned. "Still working at that apartment place?" Sandra would ask, already looking past me, towards something more interesting. I grew up in Chloe's shadow. Not unusual, I know. Plenty of younger siblings navigate the challenge of following a high-achieving firstborn. But Chloe wasn't just accomplished. She was perfect in every way that mattered to our parents. Beautiful where I was plain. Graceful where I was awkward. Charming where I was quiet. She excelled at the things Sandra and David valued: social climbing, maintaining appearances, marrying well. When Chloe brought Kyle home during her junior year of college, my parents practically wept with joy. The Reynolds family owned a moderately successful real estate development company. Kyle stood to inherit a comfortable position, if not outright wealth. More importantly, he came from good people, which, in our parents' vocabulary, meant white-collar, country club adjacent, and appropriately ambitious. My own romantic choices never measured up. The artist I dated in my early 20s horrified my mother. The nonprofit administrator I got serious with in my mid-20s bored her. When I eventually stopped bringing anyone around, they took it as further evidence of my fundamental defectiveness. Professionally, I carved out a niche my family found equal parts mystifying and embarrassing. While Chloe married into real estate money, spending her days on charity luncheons and interior decorating, I built a career in property management. I managed residential rental properties across 3 states, including Florida, for a private investment firm. It wasn't glamorous, but I'd proven myself reliable, efficient. Over 8 years, I rose from assistant property manager to regional director, overseeing a portfolio worth roughly $40 million. My family never quite understood what I did. They knew it involved apartments, tenants, and occasionally meant I missed holiday gatherings for emergencies. Sandra introduced me at social functions as working in real estate, technically not wrong, but implying something far more prestigious than my reality. What nobody in my family knew, what I deliberately kept hidden for 3 years, was that their house sat in my portfolio. How that happened? It requires another step back. My parents purchased their current home in 2019, downsizing from the 4-bedroom colonial where Chloe and I grew up. They'd been renting a transitional condo, searching for the perfect forever home when they found a charming 3-bedroom craftsman in the Maplewood Hills neighborhood. It had character, a renovated kitchen, and a price just slightly outside their budget. What my parents didn't realize was the motivated seller they negotiated with was actually a property management company handling the sale for an out-of-state investor. That investor, feeling the weight of long-distance landlord responsibilities, eventually sold the property to my firm, not my parents. My company then offered the house as a rental, quietly raising the down payment requirements beyond what Sandra and David could afford. My parents became tenants in what they believed would be their retirement home. The rent was reasonable, the lease term standard, and they'd been assured first right of refusal if it ever went back on the market. They had no reason to dig deeper into who really owned the walls around them. 2 years after they signed that lease, I got a promotion. My new responsibilities included direct oversight of the Northwest region, which contained exactly 1 property in Maplewood Hills. I recognized the address immediately. Professional ethics dictated I disclose the conflict of interest to my superiors. But personal curiosity won out instead. I said nothing. The discovery felt like finding a loaded weapon in my desk drawer. I had no immediate intention of using it, but knowing it existed fundamentally changed how I moved through family interactions. When Sandra made cutting remarks about my life choices, I'd think about the lease renewal in my system. When David praised Chloe's latest accomplishment, never acknowledging anything I'd done, I'd picture the maintenance request queue I controlled. The power was theoretical, abstract, a comfort object I never expected to actually deploy. That changed after the intervention dinner. Driving home that night, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. The humiliation sat heavy in my chest, compounded by my own cowardly agreement. I'd nodded along while they dissected my character. Promise to improve, to be less problematic, to conform. The familiar pattern of my entire childhood played out in miniature: Chloe, golden; me, tarnished. Everyone aligned in their assessment of who deserved praise and who deserved correction. Somewhere around mile marker 47, the trembling stopped. The humiliation hardened into something colder, more purposeful. By the time I pulled into my apartment, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't fight them. Fighting had never worked. Instead, I'd demonstrate exactly how problematic I could be when I actually tried. For 12 months, I managed my parents' housing from behind a corporate veil. Every rent check passed through my department. Every maintenance request crossed my desk. I never used it maliciously. I approved their reasonable requests, ensured prompt repairs, even advocated internally for modest rent increases. If anything, they received better service than they would have from a stranger. During this period, I observed my family with newfound detachment. Holiday gatherings became research opportunities. I cataloged every exclusion, inside jokes I wasn't part of, vacation plans made without consulting my schedule, the family group chat that somehow never included my number. Chloe hosted a birthday party for Leo at a trampoline park, inviting half the neighborhood. I learned about it from Aunt Susan 3 days later. When I confronted Chloe about the oversight, she just laughed it off. It was just a kid's thing. I didn't think you'd want to come anyway. You've never seemed that interested in the children. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. I wasn't particularly close to Leo and Maya. But my distance wasn't disinterest. It was self-protection. Every time I tried to build a relationship, Chloe or Kyle would interrupt, redirect, find some reason to shuttle the children elsewhere. They treated me like a vaguely embarrassing relative, best kept at arm's length, and the children absorbed that message without understanding its source. Sandra made matters worse, constantly comparing my interactions with the kids to Chloe's maternal warmth. You could learn something from your sister, she'd say after Chloe performed some display of affection. Children need to feel loved, not analyzed. As if I'd been conducting experiments, instead of just asking Leo about his favorite video games. That night, driving home alone after promising to do better, I finally understood how I might use my position for something more. The weeks following felt like inhabiting someone else's life. I attended family functions with forced cheerfulness. Complimented Chloe's children, agreed with Sandra's opinions, laughed at David's stale jokes. I transformed myself into the daughter they'd always wanted. And they ate it up with spoons. Meanwhile, I documented everything. Their criticism of me stretched back further than that single dinner. I pulled up old text messages where Sandra called me exhausting. Emails from Chloe explaining why I wasn't invited to certain events because my energy would ruin them. I compiled a mental archive of every slight, every exclusion, every time I'd been blamed for problems I hadn't caused. One evening, I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by printed emails and photographs, constructing a timeline of grievances. The exercise was meant to fuel my anger, to keep the fire burning when doubt threatened to extinguish it. Instead, I found myself crying over a high school graduation photo. Me, standing slightly apart from the family cluster. Sandra's hand on Chloe's shoulder. David looking somewhere off camera. Nobody touching me. I dried my tears and kept working. The documentation revealed patterns I'd felt but never articulated. Chloe's transgressions were always forgiven, explained away, reframed as understandable. That time she crashed David's car during college? She was stressed about finals. Her maxed-out credit card my parents quietly paid off? Young people make mistakes. Her first marriage, lasting 11 months and ending in divorce? Nobody discussed it. Incompatible personalities, not her fault. My mistakes received no such generous interpretation. A B- on a report card meant I wasn't applying myself. A broken vase during childhood meant I was careless and destructive. My decision to major in business administration instead of something creative like Chloe's art history degree meant I lacked imagination and depth. The double standard extended to our adult lives. When Chloe quit her part-time gallery job to become a full-time homemaker, Sandra praised her dedication to family. When I worked 60-hour weeks climbing the corporate ladder, that same mother wondered aloud why I couldn't find better work-life balance. Chloe's choice to stop working was strength. My choice to keep working was dysfunction. I added these observations to my documentation, building a case file for a trial only I would ever conduct. Grandma Eleanor's birthday party became my masterpiece of performance. I arrived early to help set up. Coordinated with caterers. Made sure every guest had a drink, every gift was properly logged. By the end of the evening, even Aunt Susan admitted I'd been surprisingly helpful. At the party, Grandma Eleanor pulled me aside. 80 years old now, she remained the sharpest mind in the family, though age had gentled her once formidable presence. "You're playing a game with them," she said quietly. I recognized the look. "Your grandfather had it sometimes." "I don't know what you mean, Grandma." She patted my hand. "I'm not judging, sweetheart. This family has never been kind to people who don't fit the mold. Just be careful. Games have a way of getting out of control." I assured her I was simply trying to improve family relationships. She smiled like she knew I was lying, but respected my right to do so. Spring arrived, and with it, lease renewal season. My parents' 3-year lease was expiring in July. Standard procedure meant sending renewal paperwork 90 days in advance, landing in early April. I took a personal day on April 3rd, drove to a coffee shop 40 miles from my office. There, using my work laptop and VPN, I accessed my parents' file. The property had appreciated significantly. Market rate rent for comparable homes in Maplewood Hills had jumped nearly 30%. Corporate policy encouraged bringing long-term tenants up to market rate during renewals. I didn't alter my parents' renewal terms. I simply let policy do its work. The new monthly rent figure on their notice? An increase of $718. Not illegal, not even unusual in the current market, but for retirees living on fixed income, it was devastating. Sandra called me 3 days later, her voice trembling with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Olivia, you work in property management. Can you explain this? Is this normal?" "Unfortunately, yes," I said, keeping my tone sympathetic, professional. "The rental market's been brutal. Landlords everywhere are raising rates to match property values. Have you tried negotiating? Your father sent an email to the management company. They said the rate was firm. Because I'd made sure to flag their account as non-negotiable, citing a fictional internal policy about properties in high-demand neighborhoods. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I wish there was something I could do." She thanked me for listening and hung up. I felt nothing. Over the following weeks, I watched my family scramble. David and Sandra couldn't afford the new rent on their retirement income. Chloe offered to help, but her own finances were tighter than she let on. Kyle's family money had largely evaporated in a series of bad investments. The real estate development company he stood to inherit? quietly sold off in pieces 2 years prior. My parents explored their options. They couldn't buy, their credit wasn't strong enough for a mortgage after medical bills had gone to collections. They couldn't easily find another rental either. The same market conditions driving their current increase affected every property in their price range. Moving to a cheaper area meant leaving behind their social network, their church, their entire carefully constructed lives. In June, Chloe organized another family meeting. This time, brainstorming solutions to our parents' housing crisis. What if they moved in with you? Kyle suggested to Chloe, clearly hoping she'd refuse. We don't have the space, Chloe said quickly. The kids each need their own rooms, and my home office is non-negotiable. Everyone looked at me. I have a one-bedroom apartment, I said. The couch pulls out, but it's not a long-term solution. Sandra actually teared up. We never should have sold the Colonial. We had equity there. We had stability. David put his arm around her. We'll figure something out. We always do. But they didn't figure it out. July 1st arrived. My parents were still in their craftsman house, still paying rent they couldn't afford, still hemorrhaging savings they'd need for actual retirement. In August, I made my second move. As regional director, one of my responsibilities was routine property inspections. Most landlords required annual walkthroughs to assess wear and tear, ensure lease compliance, identify maintenance issues. These were typically scheduled with reasonable notice and professional courtesy. I scheduled my parents' inspection for August 15th, giving them the legally required 72 hours notice. The letter came from the management company, not from me personally. Still, it shook them. We've never had an inspection before, Sandra told me over the phone. What are they looking for? Are we in trouble? It's standard, I assured her. Just make sure the smoke detectors work and the place is reasonably tidy. Nothing to worry about. The guilt I expected hadn't materialized. My conscience operated on a delay, absorbing each action without immediate reaction, storing the moral weight for later. In the moment, executing my plan felt clinical, almost boring. I was simply doing my job with a particular property, following procedures that applied to thousands of tenants across my portfolio. That I knew these particular tenants intimately seemed almost incidental. On inspection day, I sent a junior colleague named Mark to conduct the walkthrough. I'd specifically chosen Mark because he didn't know my family connection and because he had a reputation for being thorough to the point of irritating. Mark's report landed on my desk 3 days later. He noted several minor issues: a bathroom faucet with a slow drip, some carpet wear in high-traffic areas, a small crack in one window seal. Nothing requiring immediate action. Nothing justifying penalties. But the report also noted my parents had made unauthorized modifications. Specifically, they'd installed a garden shed in the backyard, a modest 8x10 structure where David kept his tools, without seeking written approval from the management company. In most circumstances, this kind of violation resulted in a form letter, remove the structure, or apply for retroactive approval. Nothing severe, nothing urgent. I escalated it. My reasoning, documented carefully in internal communications, centered on liability. The shed hadn't been professionally installed. We had no record of its construction or foundation. If it collapsed, injuring someone, the property owner could face legal exposure. Better to address it formally than risk future complications. The letter my parents received gave them 30 days to remove the shed or face lease violation proceedings. David called me in a panic. They're saying we violated our lease over a garden shed I built with my own 2 hands. We could lose our home, Olivia. His voice cracked on the word home, and something shifted in my chest. My father wasn't a demonstrative man. Hearing him this close to tears should have stopped me cold. It didn't. The armor I'd built around my intentions held firm. Let me look into it, I said. Maybe I can find someone at the company who can help. For 2 weeks, I looked into it. I made calls that went nowhere. Sent emails that were ignored. I represented myself as their advocate while ensuring every possible avenue of resolution remained closed. The performance required constant attention. I had to seem genuinely frustrated by the bureaucratic obstacles I directed. I practiced my tone in the bathroom mirror before update calls, making sure my voice conveyed the right mixture of effort and futility. Late at night, alone in my apartment, the magnitude of my deception sometimes overwhelmed me. I'd lie awake calculating the stress I was causing, imagining my father's blood pressure, my mother's sleepless nights. These thoughts didn't translate to action. Remorse existed in one compartment of my mind. The plan continued executing from another. Finally, David dismantled the shed himself. It took him a weekend of work that clearly taxed his 72-year-old body. Sandra sent me photos of the empty patch of dirt where it had stood. "Your father's heartbroken," she said. He loved that shed. It was his space. The pattern continued through fall. A new policy limited overnight guests to 7 consecutive days, disrupting my parents' plans to host Aunt Susan during her post-surgery recovery. A modification to the landscaping agreement required them to maintain the yard to professional standards, easy for younger tenants, challenging for seniors with limited mobility. Every change was legal, defensible, and crushing. By November, my parents' savings had dwindled significantly. They'd reduced their food budget, canceled subscriptions, postponed David's dental work. The stress showed in their faces, their postures, their increasingly desperate phone calls to me seeking advice I had no intention of giving honestly. During my visits, I started noticing physical changes. Sandra's silver hair, once meticulously styled every 6 weeks, showed darker roots she couldn't afford to address. David's wardrobe, never fashionable but always neat, displayed the wear of clothes washed too many times. The house itself, still technically maintained to lease standards, took on a slightly neglected quality, small repairs deferred, decorations thinned as items were quietly sold. One afternoon, I stopped by unannounced. Found my mother clipping coupons at the kitchen table. Stacks of newspaper circulars surrounded her, organized by store and expiration date. She looked up, embarrassed when I walked in. "Just planning the grocery trip," she said, as if coupon clipping required explanation. I helped her sort for an hour. We didn't talk about why this had become necessary. Didn't talk about the rent increase, or the shed, or the endless policy changes making their lives harder. We talked about brands we liked, stores with the best deals, whether generic medications worked as well as name brand. Normal mother-daughter conversation, stripped of pretense. For that hour, I almost forgot what I was doing to her. Thanksgiving arrived, and with it, another family gathering. We met at Chloe's house this time. My parents no longer felt comfortable hosting, ashamed of their newly constrained circumstances. The meal was subdued. Gone was the smug confidence that had characterized family dinners since that intervention 18 months prior. Chloe looked tired. Kyle looked defeated. My parents looked old in a way that had nothing to do with actual age. After dessert, David stood to make a toast. His hands shook slightly as he raised his glass. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he said. "This has been a difficult year. Sandra and I have faced some challenges we never expected. But family is what matters. Family is what endures." He looked directly at me. "Olivia, I want to apologize." The table went silent. "Last year at dinner, we said some things that weren't fair. We blamed you for problems that weren't your fault. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, watching everything fall apart around us, and I realized we were wrong. You've been the one person trying to help us through this housing nightmare. You've answered every panicked phone call. You've researched options we wouldn't have found on our own. You've been a good daughter, and we haven't always been good parents to you." Sandra nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "We're sorry, sweetheart. For a moment, just one brief, flickering moment, I considered stopping. The apology was genuine. My parents were suffering, and I caused that suffering. Whatever satisfaction I'd expected from watching their lives crumble tasted metallic and strange on my tongue. The table waited for my response. Chloe's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Kyle looked uncomfortable, out of his depth in a moment of authentic family emotion. Even Aunt Susan, complicit in my original condemnation, nodded encouragingly. A dozen possible futures branched from this moment. I could confess everything, throw myself on their mercy, spend years rebuilding trust I'd deliberately destroyed. I could continue my campaign, pushing forward until they had nothing left. I could walk away entirely, relocate to a different city, let the whole mess resolve without my further involvement. But I remembered every Christmas where Chloe's gifts outshone mine. Every family photo where I was positioned at the edge, an afterthought. That dinner where they told me I was the problem, while everyone nodded in agreement. I smiled warmly and accepted their apology. The moment passed. Dinner continued. Dessert was served, a pumpkin pie Chloe ordered from a bakery, presented as if she'd made it herself. Nobody corrected her claim. I ate my slice, made appreciative noises, playing the role of reconciled daughter with practiced ease. December brought the final blow. Property tax assessments in our county had risen sharply, reflecting the same market appreciation that justified rental increases. My company's ownership group decided to sell several properties in the Northwest region, including the Craftsman in Maplewood Hills. My parents' home would go on the market in January. Standard procedure required notifying tenants of an impending sale. It also required honoring existing lease terms. Tenants couldn't simply be evicted. My parents' current lease ran through June. They had time. What they didn't have was money. Purchasing the home required a down payment and mortgage qualification they couldn't achieve. Staying as tenants meant eventually facing whatever terms a new owner might impose. Leaving meant starting over in a rental market that had only grown more brutal. I drafted the sale notification letter myself, choosing the language carefully, making it sound both sympathetic and final. The letter went out on December 10th. Sandra called me, sobbing. "They're selling our house, Olivia. After everything we've been through, all the increases, the inspections, the rules, now they're just selling it out from under us." "I'm so sorry, Mom." The words came easily now. "Can't you do anything? You work for a property management company. Don't you have connections? Isn't there someone who can help?" "I've tried, Mom. I've done everything I can." Christmas was quiet that year. My parents gave token gifts they clearly couldn't afford. Chloe brought a ham she'd bought on sale. Even the children seemed subdued, picking up on the tension that had become our family's permanent atmosphere. On December 27th, Grandma Eleanor called me privately. Her voice was steady, despite her age. "You did this," she said. No accusation, just a statement of fact. "Did what, Grandma?" "The housing problems. The inspections. The shed. All of it. You work for the company that owns their house, don't you?" I didn't answer. "I told you games get out of control. Your parents are talking about moving to that retirement community in Wisconsin, the cheap one. Your grandfather and I looked at places like that before he died. They're where dreams go to wither. They blame me for everything wrong with this family. They were wrong. But being wrong doesn't make wrong right. You don't understand what it's like being the scapegoat." "I understand perfectly. My own mother favored my brother until the day she died. I could have destroyed him a dozen times over. I had opportunities, believe me. I chose not to take them. Some prices are too high, even for justice." I hung up without saying goodbye. January arrived, and with it, the listing of my parents' home. The asking price reflected current market conditions, well beyond what David and Sandra could afford, well beyond what most middle-class families in the area could manage. Open houses drew young professional couples, investors, speculators. My parents smiled awkwardly at strangers touring their living room. The house sold in February to a software engineer relocating from New York. The new owner wanted possession by April, 3 months before my parents' lease expired in July. She offered a buyout for $1,000 to vacate early. My parents took the money. They had no choice. In March, they moved. Not to Chloe's house, she still didn't have room. Not to mine, my one-bedroom suddenly felt like an inadequate excuse. They rented a small apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, 30 minutes away. The complex had thin walls, limited parking, and a persistent smell of mildew in the hallways. Moving day arrived, gray and drizzling, matching the occasion's somber mood. A rented truck sat in the craftsman's driveway, its back doors yawning open to receive a lifetime of accumulated possessions. David directed operations with forced cheerfulness, pointing movers toward boxes labeled in Sandra's careful handwriting. I helped them move, carried boxes, assembled furniture, pretended this wasn't exactly what I'd engineered. The new apartment occupied the second floor of a building constructed in the 1970s, minimally maintained since. Carpets bore stains from previous tenants. Windows faced a parking lot where bass-heavy music thumped from passing cars at all hours. The kitchen featured appliances that functioned but inspired no confidence, surfaces yellowed by decades of use. Sandra tried to put a positive spin on it. "It's cozy," she said, surveying the living room that couldn't quite accommodate all their furniture. "We'll find something better once we get back on our feet." David said nothing. He stood at the window, looking out at the parking lot, shoulders slumped in a posture I'd never seen from him before. My father had always carried himself with quiet dignity, a man comfortable in his place in the world. That man seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone smaller, older, defeated. My father thanked me for being there. My mother hugged me, saying I was the only one they could count on. The satisfaction I'd expected never came. What came instead was a phone call from Mark, my junior colleague, in April. "Hey," he said, "I was cleaning out old files and found something weird. That property in Maplewood Hills, the one with the garden shed violation, the tenant's last name was the same as yours, and their emergency contact was listed as Olivia, phone number ending in your extension." My stomach dropped. Coincidence? Common name? Maybe. But I also noticed you flagged their account as non-negotiable during renewal season. And you personally escalated the shed issue. And you drafted the sale notification letter instead of letting the admin team handle it. What are you suggesting? Nothing. Just found it interesting. He hung up. I spent the rest of the day waiting for a call from HR that never came. Mark apparently kept his observations to himself, but his words echoed in my mind for weeks. He'd seen the pattern. Others might, too. My careful game had left traces I hadn't anticipated. Mother's Day fell on a rainy Sunday. I visited my parents' new apartment with flowers and a card. The place felt cramped, dim. Wrong. David sat in a recliner, television volume too loud. Sandra made tea in a kitchen barely big enough for one. We talked about nothing important, the weather, a show Chloe's kids were watching, Grandma Eleanor's declining health. Normal family conversation, stripped of the pretense that used to fill our gatherings. "I miss the house," Sandra admitted eventually. "I miss my garden. I miss having space to breathe." "I know, Mom. Sometimes I wonder if we did something to deserve this. If God was punishing us for something." "You didn't deserve this," I said. The words felt hollow because I knew the truth. They hadn't deserved this. Not entirely. They'd been thoughtless, cruel in the casual way families often are, willing to make me their scapegoat. But they hadn't deserved to lose their home, their security, their peace. I had made myself the problem they accused me of being. And in solving my own pain, I'd created wounds that wouldn't heal. The drive home took longer than usual because I pulled over twice, unable to see the road through my tears. In June, I submitted my resignation from the property management company. My supervisor seemed surprised, but didn't ask too many questions. I cited burnout, which wasn't entirely a lie. I spent the summer job hunting, processing, trying to understand who I'd become. The righteous anger that had fueled my campaign against my parents had burned out, leaving only ash and regret. How do you come back from something like that?